Welcome. My name is Brooks Bonner, and I am the program director at the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation with our principal program, the Half Earth Project. And I am here today with Alexandra Climent from the Endangered Rainforest Rescue. Today is another episode in our series of Places for a Half Earth Future, where this series is really focused on providing evidence-based identification and showcasing the most important places in the world for biodiversity protection. And that identification and the kind of highlighting of these places is something that we're trying to do to really shine a light on the education, the research, and the conservation activities that we hope will inspire people to move towards successful stewardship of these critical places for biodiversity around the world. Today, obviously we're very excited to kind of have this new format, have an interview here with Alexandra. And really, we're going to be looking to talk a little bit more about how we can use science to influence, conservation work on the ground, but really focusing on the work that she does with the Endangered Rainforest Rescue. First off, I just want to say thank you for being here, Alexandra. For our audience, I think they would love to just hear a little bit more about you, about the Endangered Rainforest Rescue, and how you got connected to this work in Panama and the Darién region.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here and talk about the work that we do at Endangered Rainforest Rescue. So just to start, a little background about me. I'm a rainforest conservationist and also an artist. And my journey into conservation is a little bit unconventional. It actually started with my artistic practice, sculpting fallen trees that I found in the rainforest. These were all trees that were blocking pathways for different indigenous communities throughout the area. And I was young at the time, and I wanted to find a way to show people the beauty of the rainforest and understand the feeling that I was feeling when I was surrounded by nature. Because we're so often told that we have to protect the rainforest, but most people will never see it. So my idea was to gather these fallen trees and make something truly sustainable out of it where it can be used for many generations. So I basically taught myself how to make sculptural art and fine furniture out of this very dense wood.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an intense journey in itself because it's such a limiting material. I mean, doing anything with it is very difficult. So even learning from the indigenous communities how they would carve from this wood, it's just so magical what they're able to do. So it took me many years to kind of formulate an artistic career. Back in New York, I was relatively successful at getting people to see the beauty of this wood and maybe understand and have a peek inside of the beauty of the forest. But every time I traveled down to South America, at the time, I would just see the forest rapidly disappearing. So the very species that I was working with, from having them live their full life on the jungle floor to sculpting them with my hands, those species were at the threat of extinction. What was the point of the art world and art if it wasn't changing anything, if it wasn't moving anything? So I decided then that I would participate directly in the conservation of these species, switching my artistic practice, from finding fallen trees into finding seeds of endangered tree species and using them for restoration.
Wow. What a path. That's fantastic. I love it. Going from being an artist to experiencing kind of the loss and the devastation that's happening in this area it's incredible. It is a pretty unique story, but I love that.
Yeah, very, very, very random.
No, but I think it shows the kind of connection that you have as an artist with the materials that you work with, right? And where they come from. They don't just appear out of nowhere. They are created in these complex systems that we're just beginning to understand. These complex systems with incredible biodiversity, and the Darién region itself is one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet, especially in the Americas. But as you kind of talk about, it's under threat of deforestation. You can actually see that for yourself if you go to the Half Earth Project map, and you can see the richness and the rarity of the biodiversity in this region, of what we know so far. But, this area, if you look at it on the map, it shines brightly in these tones of greens and yellows, which really indicate these areas are of high conservation priority because we know that there are countless species there, not only that we have defined through science, but also there are countless more that we have not, quote unquote, discovered yet. So I think, given this kind of immense diversity of life that's there, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about maybe some specific species that you work with, whether it be trees or whether it be vertebrates or animals or mammals. I think that would be interesting for folks to hear a little bit more about.
Yeah, I mean, well, the whole foundation when I founded Endangered Rainforest Rescue was focused on finding these endangered tree species because that was what I was connected to with my work.
Right.
And understanding that there was also so little research in the Darien, I had to use a combination of scientific research and fostering relationships that took many, many years with the indigenous communities there that basically taught me everything that I know. So I was learning about what was disappearing in the forest, mostly from them. And along with that, in the corridor where we're working right now to restore, there's been an organization tracking the jaguar in that region. What we are focusing on now at Endangered Rainforest Rescue is, we started off with collecting seeds of endangered tree species, going on expeditions that would last weeks, kind of mapping these trees, logging where they were, identification, which is very difficult. And we would collect the seeds and we've set up nurseries in different indigenous communities to grow them. But now with the identification of this critical patch of deforestation where we're trying to create this wildlife corridor, we realize that we need to scale up these efforts. Mm-hmm. So what we've seen in this corridor is severe fragmentation of forest. It's like islands of forest. And the jaguar, to go back to that, when we understand because of this organization who's been tracking them, the presence of the jaguar, it's a sign that there's a healthy forest nearby. So we've been observing the jaguar walking through this fragmentation and getting into these deforested patches, and the cycle is just kind of, they'll end up eating the cattle, and that leads to the ranchers wanting to get rid of the jaguar, and it just creates this terrible cycle. And what we've also seen from that is a loss of sloths in the area, a loss of capybaras, a species that...
Not the sloths. Oh, no.
I know. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, talk about connectivity. I mean, those species, that's what they do is they need the trees to flow through the forest. So something that I think is unique about our organization and my practice is learning that these endangered species and each native species that exists in these areas, along with that specific tree species comes a plethora of other species and organisms that rely on that one specific tree. It's wild. So we understand the presence of all these species like the harpy eagle that's endangered, but there's also been such a lack of research in the area. I think part of that is because people have been warned about the Darien being this dangerous place. Yeah. So what we have the opportunity to do in our corridor because of these keystone species, like the jaguar being present, the harpy eagle, the green macaw. We have the opportunity to have scientists come here, spend time, and really understand all the other endemic species that we don't even know about, that we have no research on.
It's incredible to think about. You're talking about connectivity and how connectivity is a concept that it's very important for species survival, especially as these kind of large intact chunks of habitat are becoming more and more isolated as humans have a greater impact on our world, that, connecting these areas that are still relatively intact and healthy and functioning ecosystems is that much more important. And especially in Central America or the corridor of the Americas, right. It is on a continental scale. This is connecting two large continents, and the work that you guys are doing is really trying to make sure that flow of genetics and that flow of organisms and that those important and complex ecosystems continue to function as they should. It's kind of frightening to think about cutting off those populations and what kind of impact that would have into perpetuity.
When we talk about Darién, I mean, why I picked this area to work, like you mentioned, I mean, the connection between the Americas, right? I mean, previously North and South America were continents on their own with the big ocean in between them. And the Darién is actually one of the newest land masses to arise.
Wow.
To the continent. So if the Darién didn't exist, biodiversity as we know it would be totally different. So species like the jaguar, like the eagle, like all of these species that migrate through the Americas, we wouldn't have that if it weren't for the Darién. So it's like almost like these species, we don't even know what is existing there. There's stories when you look back into the history of how this landmass arose, about how the rise and fall of the sea level, all of these species got trapped on mountaintops. So you have all of these endemic species that exist nowhere else in the world. I mean, I think it's that 1 in every 7 plant species cannot be found anywhere else. So it's wild. And it still blows my mind every time I'm there.
Yeah, I can only begin to imagine the complexities and all the interactions that happen there that we don't understand yet. It's a reason to, to push for more understanding, to push for more scientific research, but also to incorporate, traditional sources of knowledge. And you talked about your work with the Embera, which is an indigenous group in that area. And, we talk about these enigmatic species like the jaguar and the sloth and the parrot, but, there's countless other species that also rely on these habitats for their survival. And either we know very little about them, or we haven't, they haven't been cataloged in science. And so it's so important that we're not losing these areas before we understand what is there and what could be lost, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And in this corridor where we're working, we're connecting to indigenous land on both sides. So, I mean, you might be able to see it on the map, but it's basically one of the largest patches of deforestation that's cut out into the larger ecological corridor of the Americas. So, yes, understanding what species are there is very important in the forests that are intact on both sides. I mean, and you can clearly see when you look at all of the deforestation that's happening, the surrounding areas are all protected indigenous spaces. So there's no argument that when we have indigenous communities in charge of their own lands, that we will have intact forests. So they are the people that understand this the best. And that's why I've relied on them so much to be part of this organization to teach me about all of that. I mean, when we're going on seed collection, I've learned about different beetles, different fungi, all of these things that just they only find it on the tree. So when they're looking for that specific animal, they look for a specific tree. Right. So it's been unbelievable.
That kind of leads me into my next thought was really around, what it's been like working with them, what types of traditional knowledge or sustainable development practices that are part of how they have stewarded these areas for millennia. I wonder if you can talk maybe a little bit more about that, and obviously work quite closely with the Embera people in Panama. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, these indigenous communities in the Embera, where I've been lucky enough to spend so much time, you really learn about true sustainability because everything that they need comes from the forest.
Right.
And that's why they respect it. And I think we've kind of lost that. We've lost that connectivity and understanding because we don't know where things come from anymore.
It's a different type of connectivity from what we were talking about earlier, right?
And their connection is to everything. So a species like the jaguar, like in their spirituality and their traditions and their stories, I mean, that is the guardian of the jungle. It's a sign, it's a spirit. So everything has a spirit, the trees, the bugs, the leaves that fall, it's all interconnected. So when I speak with them about things and they explain things to me, it's this, again, the theme, connection, right? This connected way where you can't have one without the other. Right. So when they go and eat, they're collecting their food from the forest. They know that they need to replenish what's been lost. Another thing that I think we don't understand in the global north, right? We don't understand that we need to replace things. We can't just extract and expect there to be something left over for us. Eventually, it will all be depleted. And that's what you've seen in this area where we're working. It's like, it's all cattle. It's all deforested for cattle that's shipped off somewhere else. So the knowledge that they have, it's like common sense to them. When I'm looking for specific trees and I get excited because I think that I found a species that's been lost, they're like, by the way, we passed about 5 or 6 different species that you didn't even ask about. So, I mean, it's just what I've learned from them and the way that I've also been able to just slow down and take it all in as well. Like time moves very different when you are in these communities. Yeah. And something that I really value is seeing how everybody plays a role. Like when you raise a family and you have a child, that child is a child of the community. Everybody takes care of each other. The idea of competition doesn't exist, right? Well, yeah, I mean, I can go on forever about all the ways that I'm so lucky that the last 15 years of my life, I've been able to learn from these people.
That's great. That's great. It's fantastic to hear about, I think, because of globalization, I think so much of our perspective of the world has been homogenized. And so I think it's really critical that, as that happens, it's important that we are still engaging and that we're still preserving life in all of its forms. And I think cultural is also something that should also be something that we're thinking about as a way of connecting with biodiversity and as a way of seeing the world in a different way. Maybe you can introduce your colleague that's going to be shown in this next clip.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I've been working with Polo. He is an Embera living in Playa Muerto region of Darién, which is a pretty remote region. I mean, it's on the Pacific coast of Panama and bordering Colombia. And he is the manager of a nursery there. So he's been working with all of these different tree species for a really long time. And when we go on these seed collection trips, I mean, he's just always teaching me so much about the seeds and how they grow. And I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years now, but he's just able to do it so naturally. So I would love to have him speak to you and tell you about his experience.
Great. Let's hear from him.
Estamos aquí en la comunidad de Playa Muerte, haciendo un recorrido de rescatar lo que se nos ha perdido, como el bálsamo, el nazareno, como el almendro, el caoba. Estamos haciendo un trabajo en conjunto con los compañeros para que eso no se vaya a perder, porque ya en muchas comunidades no hay esa clase de especies. Y así que nos sentimos contentos y queremos hacer un vivero aquí en la comunidad para tener toda esa clase de especies.
Incorporating different sources of knowledge and understanding is really key to our ability to care for and protect all species.
Mm-hmm.
I think this really gets at the heart of the Half Earth Project and the Half Earth Project map. We want the data on the map to be useful for conservation decision makers, whether they are at the national, regional, or local scales. The Places for a Half Earth Future layer specifically is one way that we utilize the most up-to-date species information to inform and inspire action to protect species in places where they are most needed. By identifying, where conservation actions can have the greatest impact on species survival, we really see it as a targeted starting point to address the biodiversity crisis, which I know at times can feel so overwhelming.
Yes. Yeah.
How would you say, Alexandra, so kind of knowing what you know about, the Half Earth Project map, how would you see information like this being valuable or utilized by an organization like yours, specifically thinking about being able to produce kind of detailed species lists for a given area like the Darién region and going towards potential protection or stewardship of some of these places?
Right. I mean, I think having information on these species that we don't even know about is so valuable. I mean, right now, if you looked at the corridor that we're trying to connect in this patch of deforestation, I mean, we don't have a lot of information on the species there because there's so much deforestation. And what you're speaking about with the indigenous communities and biodiversity, that's why we're connecting to the indigenous territories on both sides. So doing those studies to understand the species that are in those intact forests are so valuable to us to prove what we already know, that this area is just so high in endemic species and biodiversity, and then the connectivity of the Darién and the importance of that on top of it. So making our connection in this corridor and having the species be able to flow through those indigenous territories, keeping up that migration between the two continents. That's the theme over and over again. And having the Half Earth map be able to show that. Again, like you see these hotspots. And what we're trying to do is connect them so that in our area where the forest has been totally devastated, those hotspots can radiate back in and flow. So it's invaluable for us to have this type of information on the species and all the connectivity to prove.
Right. Well, and it's valuable to have a multi-pronged approach to, identifying and understanding these spaces. I think that's the only way that we're going to, have any hope in terms of trying to understand them to hopefully try and steward them and protect them into the future. The Darién region itself, you can actually visit when you go to the Half Earth Project map, you can explore the Places for a Half Earth Future and you can actually look at all the species from in terms of vertebrates, in terms of reptiles, amphibians, mammals, and birds that you expect to find there. And so we really see that as a valuable starting point. And also you can look at those individual species and see how well each one is being protected. And you'll see as you go through that there's a number of species that lack the level of protection that is necessary for us to assure that our children and our grandchildren will be able to know that those species exist in the future. I think, this conversation has shown me how much individuals like yourself and the Endangered Rainforest Rescue are, how important the work that you're doing to not only restore some of the most critical tropical forests in the world, but focusing on forests, focusing on those species that only exist in small ranges in such an important area of the Americas. I think also showing the science of the Half Earth Project map and pointing to those areas and saying, look, these areas are super important, but there's still more to learn. And I think it's one of the critical thing that we should be doing is focusing our efforts so that we're preserving species that really need it. There's been a number of, I think, articles and research publications recently talking about how much of conservation funding goes to, those big enigmatic species that we all associate with conservation, whether it be pandas or whether it be elephants. And, I'm not saying that those species are not valuable, but there are countless other species that we may be losing if we can prioritize those efforts into areas where we know that there are species that lack protection. Then I think we can do a better job of preserving those species into the future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, even with the jaguar, people love the big animals, the big cats. I do too. They're beautiful. But for me, it's just that they're just a sign of so many other species that exist in that area. Right. And again, for me to go back with the specific and native tree species that I work with, I can't express enough how we often, what you're saying, we focus on these big, species that get attention, but we're not focusing on the building blocks to make sure that all of the species in the forest that we don't even know about continue to exist. So I always get bothered when people are just focused on just one species, like, oh, they have a project that focuses, I don't know, on an elephant or a turtle or this or that. We need that. We need people to be doing that research. I'm grateful for it. But what are we doing to build back these larger ecosystems that we don't know? We don't know what the species are, or some of the lesser known spiders or bats or reptiles. There's so many. It's just unbelievable. So I couldn't agree with you more. I'm very passionate about that, not just focusing on the big species.
Every species has value. And I think that it'd be foolish of us as human beings to declare, certain species has a higher value than others because we don't completely understand these systems. And so until we, understand more, I think it behooves us to, try to preserve as much of these species as possible so that we can assure that these systems that we rely on as biological beings that continue to function in a relatively healthy manner so that we can continue to benefit from oxygen and from clean water. Things of that sort.
Absolutely. We're really excited. We're partnering hopefully with Fauna Forever. They're a group of scientists that are going to come and they're going to stay in our corridor and go into the more intact forest and study every type of animal and species possible. So that report should have some really cool information. I'm really excited.
That's great. I would love to hear how, what comes of that. And hopefully there's a way that we can kind of incorporate that data into the Half Earth Project map as well, so that can be displayed and we can really highlight, what type of information, what species, what new information on species that are there.
Right. It's going to be very helpful for us. Even going back to the trees and the connectivity, like finding out that this animal, this beetle lives on this tree, and then we can take that tree and make sure, okay, is that in our reforestation plan? How are we putting these trees next to each other? Because that matters too. We're trying to regenerate a forest that's the most natural as possible to bring back that biodiversity.
Right. It's no easy task. So I commend you and your organization's work. Again, thank you for being here today. I kind of want to end with, how can the audience engage with your work, either personally, your artwork, or with the Endangered Rainforest Rescue?
Sure. We try to keep our website as updated as possible, endangeredrainforestrescue.org. And on social media, you can go to Endangered Rainforest Rescue or to my personal page, Alexandra Climent. I try as best I can to use those platforms to showcase, how important the Darién is, sharing my experiences on expedition and in the corridor. So you can find me there. And also, I mean, I'm here for any questions too. After interviews, I always get so many questions about the space, the Darién. People are fascinated. So you can email me. My email's up on my website anytime.
That's great. For more information on the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation, the Half Earth Project, and places for a Half Earth future, you can go to our website at eowilsonfoundation.org. You can search for Half Earth Project, or you can click on the links written in the story which accompanies this video. We'll also include Alexandra's links that she mentioned earlier so that you can explore the Endangered Rainforest Rescue and her website as well.